Hello, welcome to MC and MADD Talk to Civil Wars. This is episode 20. We're going to do a spotlight on just one officer in particular this week. He was a general, right?
Yes.
Yeah, General John Reynolds. He's a Union officer. You want to tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, John Reynolds was born, as you know, in 1820s. And he was born in Pennsylvania. He was a Pennsylvania man. When he was, I think, 17 years old, he was admitted to the academy at West Point. His family was well-to-do. All right, his family. He was recommended to West Point by a family friend who also happened to be a U.S. senator from Pennsylvania, I believe.
Right. Well, that you have to get recommended by a senator or something to even get in, don't you?
No, well, you do have to get recommended by one of the representatives from your state or your congressional representative. However, in his case, the representative was a family friend. That's what I'm trying to point out to you. His family was well off. They had high society, ties. Right now, he himself was kind of like the renegade. All right, he wanted to go into the military and be part of the military rather than go into the politics and so forth. He served under Winfield Scott, I believe, in the Mexican American campaign, all right, or Mexican War. The U.S. Mexican War. Right.
Yeah.
As did many of the well-known officers at some point served in that. He was promoted twice after the war. All right. He went west, and he went west with two of his good friends, Winfield Hancock, who is also a Union general, and also with Lewis Armistead, who fought for the South and died in the same battle as he did.
Were they actually fighting each other? That'd be interesting.
No. No. Although the bad part is they were fighting each other. Winfield Scott and Armistead fought each other directly.
Interesting. Yeah. So at the outbreak of the American Civil War, he immediately sides with the Union, right? He didn't even have to think twice about it.
Well, as being from Pennsylvania, obviously, you're going to take your state loyalties into account, which he, of course, did. Armistead left the Western Theater. Now, in the Western Theater, there was a suppression in Oregon with the River Indians. Campaign. I know I'm butchering what the exact term was. There was a campaign against the Native Americans that ended up putting them on reservations. In many ways, it kind of went the way that the Sioux Indian situation would go later on after the Civil War, where some tribes agreed to be on the reservation, other tribes didn't, and as a result, you had a bifurcation of what was going on. So you generally had chaos. And they were there to suppress it. Eventually, they were successful. All right, there was a couple of battles. They were, in the grand scheme of things, fairly small affairs. All right, 500, 600 men on either side. In one of the battles, actually, the Indians actually were the victors. Although there wasn't a mass slaughter, like I said, I think it was 15 people killed. A total battle, I think 50 people total died. Is what the estimates were, but so you can see that he maintained being a military man. It was his career. All right, he is one of the few generals, all right, that has West Point experience. And one of the things that I wanted to point out about this is when he graduated. He graduated 26th in his class. Now that seems like it'd be pretty high until you realize there was only 52 people graduating that year. So
yeah, he was pretty right in the middle.
So you end up with the people graduating West Point, which is basically the premier academy of the nation. But you're only putting out 50 people a year. Okay, so how many people had been graduated, all right, that were able to serve in the war if you're only putting out 50 people a year, right? In 10 years, you've only put out 500 people. In 20 years, you've only put out 1,000 people. So of all the people that served in the Civil War, I think it was the total men in arms was approximately 4 million people. At some point in time were under arms in the Civil War. So out of those 4 million, maybe 1,500 had any kind of real training militarized coming from West Point. Now, you also had VMI and you also had the Citadel. All right. But of course, the vast majority of the graduates from the Citadel and VMI obviously served in the Confederate Army.
Yeah, and even the people that taught there, like Stonewall Jackson, for instance, also, you know, stayed in the South and fought for Confederacy.
So it shows you just how lacking in military experience the North began the war with true military leadership. All right, as an example, he, of course, because of his experience, is promoted. And although one of the things that does happen in the early part of when he joins the North is he gets orders to go here, to go there, to go everywhere. All right. At one point, he was ordered to go to North Carolina, and then they redo his orders to keep him here. And eventually, he settles into the Army of the Potomac as a direct result of McClellan having interviewed him, saying, "No, I want this person in my military or in my army," and basically cancels the order. So he's at the chaos at the beginning of the war. It shows just how chaotic things were. All right. I mean, he had orders that would less than a week later would be countermanded and assigning him to different places. Initially, he was assigned as a quartermaster, okay, as you're trying to bolster things up and logistically before he's finally listed in the Army of the Potomac. Now, what's interesting is he participates. He is a member of the Army of the Potomac when the Peninsula campaign kicks off. And he fights in the Peninsula campaign. His troops fight very well. In fact, at no point did the rebels ever break through any of his or Meade's line, his fellow Pennsylvanian. However, during one of the retreats where he had been up for straight 48 hours, he falls asleep, all right, and his troops, not realizing he's asleep, basically leave him, and he's captured.
No shit.
Okay, and he is consequently he goes to a southern prison of war camp for a short period of time until he's traded for the general who actually Grant captured when he captured Fort Donelson.
Yeah. Okay.
And
but that's interesting. His troops just left him there.
You know, and he was well liked. It wasn't that this is something that they teach. They reinforce now in the military very much so, because they understand the chaos of war. All right, is you constantly are told to always account for your men, always know where your men are, so you don't accidentally leave them behind. All right, so you don't accidentally go off and not know where your troops were. All right, it's very by stressing that, by constantly stressing it. Okay, you're always checking when you're dead tired, because like this guy was, he had been up, and his troops had basically been up and fighting for 48 hours straight. So when you're that exhausted, it's not surprising that you would fall asleep. You know, your body will at some point say, "No, you've had enough. You're going to shut down." So he's repatriated during a prisoner exchange. Right. The next big action that's taking place, of course, is Antietam, and he is not there. And the reason he's not there is the governor of Pennsylvania, knowing that Lee is on the move, fearing that Lee is going to make it into Pennsylvania, orders him back to fortify the defenses of Pennsylvania and place him in charge of all the Pennsylvania military. the general McClellan tries to prevent this, all right, but fails actually, and the governor of Pennsylvania wins and prevails upon them to send him back. So after Lee retreats and returns to Virginia after Antietam, however, he is then once again reassigned, all right, back to the Army of the Potomac.
Okay. What defenses did he put up in Pennsylvania? Or
he was in charge of basically taking the entire Pennsylvania militia, organizing it, and training it. And so basically, as he put it, you know, I'm busy freaking training old men and young boys, all right, to drill. I mean, what else am I supposed to do? He wasn't happy about his assignment.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
I mean, because that's what the militias generally were. You know, the real military, of course, they were organizing and they were joining the military if they were going to actually fight. The militia was left up to the people who stayed behind, which were generally the old men and young boys the young boys hadn't gotten old enough to actually be accepted into the army, and the old men were obviously too old to be part of the army. So he basically drilled them until the Antietam campaign was over. He returns back to the Army of the Potomac, and he fights at Fredericksburg. At one point, it's his group that actually does the penetration in the northern portion of it. But of course, he doesn't get any kind of support to actually push through, so he's not able to take advantage of that. Same thing at Chancellorsville. Right. He was removed from the situation where Jackson came in to attack, because he was ordered to go somewhere where he didn't need to be. And so as a consequence, his troops were out of place when Jackson attacked. Otherwise, Jackson would have ran into him and his Wisconsin Black Hats, which were well known by the Confederates, and quite rightly feared. All right, as fierce fighters, the Black Hats being Black Hats from Wisconsin. There were several well-known groups. The Zouaves from New York in the Union Army were also quite feared by the Confederacy, as were the Irish troops by the Confederacy. But the Black Hats under the First Corps, and he is then, of course, through these successive actions, of course, he keeps moving up in ranks. Now, after the disaster at Fredericksburg, Lincoln interviews several people, including Reynolds, and says, "I want to make you the new commander of the Army of the Potomac." Reynolds says, "I will agree to be your new commander if you give me total autonomy," which that was never going to happen. Okay. They had given total autonomy to somebody named McClellan, and McClellan had screwed it up, and they weren't about to ever do that again. And so as a result, he stays a corps commander, and he under his suggestion, one of the people he does suggest is his fellow Pennsylvanian, Meade. And so therefore, after Fredericksburg, Meade then takes charge of the Union forces.
Yeah. Why do you think he wanted to have complete autonomy? I mean, he had to know that they weren't going to give him that.
Well, no, the worry. Okay, the problem was the way these guys understood it is they looked at people like General Halleck and so forth, and they saw them interfering with their ability to fight these battles. All right, and they would give them assignments that were related that were related politically. You got to think that why would he ask for that? He got his ass jacked out of his position as a commander, right, in the Army of the Potomac, and sent to go train boys and old men in Pennsylvania as a direct result of political considerations that had no military bearing upon what was going to go on. And as a result, it would have been his group, him and Meade would have been the ones that would have been fighting at they talk about Burnside's Bridge. And if he had been there at Burnside's Bridge, that shit wouldn't have happened. They would have stormed straight across the freaking creek. Okay, so it's this kind of that kind of interference that has led to a lot of the weird freaking problems that have gone on. And being from West Point, he has a very similar mentality that Lee had, and that McClellan had, and that several, Jackson had, which was he wanted Army discipline. Okay, that didn't mean that they hung people up by the balls all the time, but it meant that you had to keep discipline. The military had to keep discipline. You had to understand that aspect of it. And his men, all right, absolutely adored him. Okay, which is one of the reasons why you end up with what happens in the first day of battle in Gettysburg, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that's when he falls, is at Gettysburg, right?
Yes. Now, hey, 40. At Gettysburg, he's one of the people who receives the reports from Buford's cavalry, which were the ones who initially deployed in Gettysburg. And he orders his corps to move at all speed, basically to get there to support Buford's cavalry, right? As the meeting and engagement begins. And because he's bringing his entire corps with him, and as he starts his deployment, basically what it does do is it sets Gettysburg as this is where the battle is going to take place. This is where the set piece is going to happen.
Yeah, and we're not going to go completely balls deep into Gettysburg. That's a future episode. But we do need to discuss what happened leading up to when Reynolds actually falls on the field. So, yeah, you want to fill us in a little bit on that? How you doing, 40?
I'm doing well. I was just I don't mean to divert the conversation, but I was just doing a bit of a recording to a response to Punoid. So I'm ready to go, though. Lesser known generals of the Civil War. Here we go. Because that's totally the topic, right? As I remember it.
That is the topic, and the one that we're talking about right now is General Reynolds. We're kicking off with him, and then we'll let you put somebody in if you so desire.
Damn right. I actually did research, so go ahead and continue.
Okay, so Reynolds moves up on July 1st and starts to deploy his units, and he's also another one of the generals that leads basically from the front. All right, this is well known for generals at this time period. All right, for the most part, they led from the front. All right, there were very few set pieces where people are behind heavily fortified defenses at this point in the war. Everything still tends to be very much a mobile warfare. Now, the more interesting thing is as he's killed. All right. The eyewitness reports as he's killed were when he was shot, he just dropped. I mean, one of his subordinates relates it that it was the fastest they ever saw somebody die in a battlefield. All right, it was like instantaneous. And when they did the autopsy on the body, all right, and of course he is taken off the field and he is sent back home to his small town in Pennsylvania where he was buried. All right. But when they did the autopsy on the field, the bullet basically enters through the neck, all right, and leaves out the back. And this leads to a lot of speculation as to who killed him. All right. There's a lot of theories that range from his own men shot him in a friendly fire incident to just the regiment that they were facing at the time, to a Southern sniper, all right, being the one sniper from the tree, from the trajectory of the bullet, all right, as to what happened and what killed him. So
I have to say that is fairly uneventful. That's unfortunate.
Fairly uneventful. I think it was pretty eventful for him.
Well, I mean, for him, I mean, you know, in hindsight, I mean, well, so think of it from my perspective, right? So I mean, this is like one of those guys on the very first landing craft to hit Omaha Beach or something. Like, what if you were the very first guy to die during that battle? That'd be unfortunate, you know. That's, I mean, not. Don't laugh, MC. Those are our veterans. But
I realize that they're veterans.
no, but I mean that is I don't know. It's like a kind of stark nihilism, I suppose. That's not
Well,
good. I mean,
the
that's
the
kind of
questions,
shitty.
a lot of questions. There's always the question of who killed, you know, all these people. Who killed the Red Baron, for example, right?
Yeah.
People argue for whatever morbid reason and morbid curiosity, you know, who was the one who brought down the great leader. And you had the same kind of a thing going on in the South. There were a number of people that were claiming that they were the ones that they were the ones responsible for the death of Reynolds. It's not that they hated Reynolds. It's not that they didn't respect Reynolds. It's more the kind of, you know, I was the one who took down the great general, you know, kind of kind of mentality.
Yeah, I bet the Confederates weren't arguing about the one that shot Stonewall.
No, they weren't. They weren't doing that because they know for a fact it was friendly fire. Because they weren't under fire from the Union at all.
Yeah, I know. Like, yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
Well, luckily, you know, it would be hard to actually pinpoint who in a picket line that opened fire when the entire picket line opened fire. People, when they talk about Stonewall Jackson, this is something I don't think we ever talked about, was when he fell, he was not the only one of his group that got shot. I mean, people always mention Stonewall Jackson, but in his party, several of his officers that were riding with him were shot, and some of them were even killed.
That's I don't. Bad Dudge, did you want to go next? Because I actually think I have the perfect transition.
Oh, go ahead.
So I'm not entirely sure because I couldn't find much on this guy. It seems as though he's like a ghost in history almost. So the person I had picked out as to the most notable person in the Civil War was Bernard B. Do you guys know who that is by chance?
Please enlighten us.
So Bernard B. was born February 8th, 1824 in Charleston, South Carolina. He died the 22nd of July, 1861, Massachusetts, Virginia. Brigadier General was his rank. Where was he? So Bernard Elliott B. was born in Charleston, blah, 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 blah. Family moved to Pendleton, South Carolina in 1833, where he went to Pendleton Academy, served in the Mexico-American War, became a second lieutenant for gallantry, then became a captain.
So he came in as an enlisted man and was promoted. That's interesting.
Yeah, then became a captain for his role in storming of the fucking goddamn Chapultepec, thank you. In 1847. Sorry, that's a fairly native looking name. I'm not used to those native words. I use the modern words. Chapultepec in 1847. So I actually picked this person out because I actually really enjoyed their story. After resigning from the U.S. Army in 1861, he returned to Charleston and joined the first South Carolina Regulars as lieutenant colonel. On the 17th of June, 1861, he was appointed brigadier general of a brigade of Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnston's Army of Virginia at Massachusetts. Manassas Junction. Holy shit.
Oh, and that was first Manassas, huh?
Whatever you say. All right. So during the battle, which later became known as the First Battle of the Bull Run, B is known to have given Brigadier General Thomas J. Jackson the nickname Stonewall. It is said that B shouted an order to his men to rally behind the Virginians. There stands Jackson like a stone wall. No one knows if this is meant to be complimentary or an insult regarding Jackson's men not advancing. B then began to advance at the head of his brigade and fell mortally wounded. Died the next day, the 22nd of July, 1861. There we go. That was a fucking struggle to get through. But let me tell you, that's some good shit, man.
Yeah, no, I should have known that name. I forgot it was him that actually gave Stonewall the nickname. Yeah, sounds like he left the Union rather quickly and joined the Confederacy right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I picked him out because like, I don't know, he seems as though he's one of those characters that he made a very slight major impact, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, people wouldn't know the name Stonewall Jackson if it wasn't for this one, like, fucking dipshit named Barnaby B. You know, like, that's... I just thought that was rather funny. It's kind of a...
Well, he gave him the nickname Stonewall. I think that regardless, Jackson's name would have gone down in history, regardless of what nickname somebody gave up for him.
No, I mean, I understand that completely. I figured that it was really funny that, you know, this was the person to give Stonewall Jackson his nickname, and yet he died 24 hours after the fact that, you know, he almost carved this name in infamy, it seems.
Well, it could have went either way, because there was a lot of people that were upset that Jackson wasn't advancing, that Jackson was during that part of the battle, where he was just holding his group firm during the first Battle of Bull Run. But then again, to be honest, the first Battle of Bull Run was just chaos personified. Okay, it was a near run thing. All right. The one thing you can say about Jackson's troops during that entire battle was the fact that they never lost discipline. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now that sounds like, well, great. You know, a unit didn't lose discipline. Well, that was very important for a battle where you had a lot of green troops all over the place, and he was able to keep command of his troops in the field and keep control of them. That wasn't an easy thing, or yet he was able to do it. Now, Jackson himself, of course, was very much an authoritarian, as we've discussed previously. Right? I mean, he was a harsh taskmaster, unlike Reynolds, all right, who was very loved by his troops. All right, Jackson was not beloved by his troops. Well, his troops would follow him, and they'd follow him to hell and back, but that didn't mean they liked him.
Well, I mean, it seems as though, I mean, I don't know. I really wish that I would have read the 20 or 30 books that you and Mad Dodge seem to have read before you started this fucking stream. But it seems as though that, not to bloviate so much and to make Stonewall seem more a man than he is, but he almost seems like Julius Caesar in a way, if that makes sense. Like, he maybe isn't the best of person in terms of character, but his men will follow him due to the fact that he is a fair strategist, and he will ensure the lives of his men over his own to some degree. You know, he understands the value of morale, and he understands the value of tactics just enough to make an impact on the battlefield. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the way I see him.
Jackson was very much you're underselling his tactical abilities. All right. He was a master tactician. He had certain flaws that were reined in for the most part because of Lee. When he was under Lee, a lot of those flaws were quite mitigated because he was an overly aggressive commander. Right. And the thing was that Lee understood there was times when you needed to be an overly aggressive commander. Excuse me. especially when the odds are against you. You need to have somebody that has an inordinate amount of aggression. All right, being overly aggressive, however, in certain situations, can get you in a hell of a lot of trouble. All right,
Yeah.
but overall, tactically, he was very much a tactical master. He was also a taskmaster when it came to the march. I mean, I realize that we're not talking about an unknown general, but on the march, he would expect his men to march literally, 30 miles a day. And then after that 30-mile march, go straight into a battle. All right. And
Yeah.
he expected them to maintain their discipline. He expected them to go through it. He himself didn't ask anything of his men that he himself wasn't willing to give. All right. I mean, at one point during the Battle of Antietam, and I think I've mentioned this before, he literally after the not a Battle of Antietam, I'm sorry, at the Peninsula Campaign, when he arrived, they went straight into battle. They got repulsed that night, but as the Union was withdrawing and he was eating his dinner, right, for the first time he had sat down to eat, he actually was so tired he fell into a bowl of soup and almost drowned.
Yeah.
Right, because he fell asleep eating his food. That's how dead tired they were.
Well, and this next general that I was going to talk about, A.P. Hill, happened to wish that Stonewall did drown in that soup. These two did not get along whatsoever. They went to West Point together. They were in the same graduation class, but they hated each other from West Point on, even when they were serving together in the Civil War. A.P. Hill obviously was a Confederate general. Let's see. His nickname, Little Pal, A.P. Hill, he had that since he was a kid. He was born November 9th, 1825 in Culpeper, Virginia. He died April the 2nd of 1865. He was 39 years old. I believe he was in a battle when he died, right?
In the what battle?
Well, he died April 2nd of 65.
So it's probably battles of Petersburg, either Petersburg or something along those lines.
Yeah, Petersburg, Virginia. Yep. He had command of the 13th Virginia Infantry. His corps was the H.P. Hill's Light Division, 2nd Corps. He also served in the 3rd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia. He was a brigade commander at the Battle of Williamsburg, where his brigade blunted a Union attack. He was then promoted to Major General and Division Command on May 26th. Hill's new division was composed mainly of brigades pulled from the Carolinians and Georgia, and from the Georgia brigades. He was not in the Battle of Seven Pines. The battle in which Johnston was wounded and replaced in command of the Army of Northern Virginia by Robert E. Lee. June 1st was the first day that Hill began using a nickname for his division, the Light Division. Yeah, he participated in quite a few battles here. On the 3rd day, 2/3 of the men in Pickett's charge were from Hill's corps. Pickett's charge is Gettysburg. A lot of these guys ended up in Gettysburg, it seems, huh, MC?
Yeah, pretty much. Unless you want to talk about Tillman in the West, which is something that is to be noted, right? From the Confederacy, a lot of the generals, all right, that had military experience, that served in the Confederacy, did congregate somehow in the Eastern campaigns, in the Eastern battlefields. It's a consequence of several things, not the least of which is the population centers. So I mean that was one of it. It also goes to be honest, the fact that in Virginia you had a strong militia mentality, a strong military type of mentality from the state of Virginia, and that even exists even to this day, to be honest. All right, there's many more people from Virginia in the U.S. military, all right, especially the officer corps, all right, than any other state from with the density population.
Yeah, no, and I was reading ahead here. All right, so Hill had said he had no desire to live to see the collapse of the Confederacy. And on April 2nd, 1865, during the Union breakthrough in the Third Battle of Petersburg, just 7 days before Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, he got his wish and was shot dead by a Union soldier, Corporal John W. Mack, M-A-U-C-K, Mark, I don't know. He was in 138th Pennsylvania. Hill was riding to the front of the Petersburg lines, accompanied by one staff officer. The Union soldiers came upon Hill to surrender. He refused, and they shot him in the chest.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Surrender, no, bang.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I guess that's the way to do it. I mean,
well, if you're determined not to be taken prisoner, I mean.
so, sorry, what was the? You said his units were comprised of Virginia and who else?
South Carolinians and from divisions out of Georgia.
Oh, so he's practically working with troops from 3 different states, essentially. Do you think that
that was typical actually of the war? Or the generals that were in charge of corps and brigades and stuff, you would have up to a regiment level. Generally, everybody was generally came from the same group. But after the regimental level, then once you got into brigades or corps, you had multiple different states represented, and the states themselves, all right, would send units over that were. They would send a brigade. There would be a brigade of Virginians, or a brigade of Pennsylvanians, or a brigade of Marylanders, or a Maine unit, for example.
yeah.
And that this is just typical of what you would see, where the mixing would come back. Because what would happen, of course, is once you got to the army needed to go, okay, whose corps needs support, whose corps is in need of troops. So troops would then be moved in unit formations into those areas. Okay, so rather than try to break up and bring them in as individuals, saying, okay, well, we're going to bring in you need 6 men, I'll give you 6 men. This company needs 5 men, I'll just grab and put 5 men into there. Rather than do that, they would rather move in an entire new company. All right. Now, this sounds kind of sinister, but that attempt of replacement has been tried, where they would just bring in people, all right, and then just add them. They found that throughout warfare, that technique is not very efficient from a military standpoint, and so they would prefer to bring in entire units rather that had worked up together, rather than plus up individuals.
Yeah, I was about to say, because it doesn't seem as though that's a very effective tool in order to basically ensure cohesiveness as a unit, because that's one of the most important things to look for, especially when you're building a military, is cohesiveness. People train for years and years and years in order to master the same tactics for, in a sense of modern military, breach and clear tactics, or, artillery shelling the enemy, or whatever the case might be. But that's one thing I figured that AP would suffer from, especially, is the fact that his units are drawing from 3 separate states. So, what do they have in terms of, just a cohesive unit? Not much. They'd have to train for an extensive period of time.
Well, but at least it's better than trying to plus up as individuals. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's just how warfare was back then. You just have to recognize, the limitations that existed at that time for everybody.
Could you imagine, though, surviving Pickett's charge, and then you die a week before the Confederacy falls completely?
Well, the thing is about Pickett's charge is only Pickett really only lost half his division.
Only half.
All right. Well, believe me, it could have been much worse. Okay. The thing is that for all intents and purposes, the divisions were more or less shattered. Okay. Where the highest mortality rate, of course, was in those divisions was in the leadership. And that's where his division really fell apart. Is for of the 13 brigade commanders that engaged in Pickett's charge, 6 were killed, 7 were wounded and carried off the field. Okay, so you basically the leadership was basically destroyed. All right.
Was AP Hill the only one that fucking lived?
No, he was not the only one who lived, but he was one of the few that survived. Because only 6 were killed. One of the people that went there was let me think of what the guy's name was. Was General Kemper. Okay, General Kemper was shot on the battlefield. He was wounded. He was one of Pickett's one of the people in one of the brigades in Pickett's division. Of the 3, he sent three brigades were in Pickett's division. All right. You had Armistead, you had Kemper. I'm trying to think who the Garnett was the third one. All right. And Garnett was killed outright. Armistead was killed. He was shot on the battlefield. He died the next day. All right. Kemper was carried off the field. He actually survived his wound, however. All right, but it was a horrible wound. It took him a long time to convalesce to actually get back. All right. So when you talk about how are you going to rally your division, okay, well, who's in charge of what? It becomes very difficult. That's one of the reasons why Pickett. They talk about Pickett losing his entire division. All right, because he had no leadership. They had to basically try to put it together from low-ranking individuals, okay, and place them in positions that, quite frankly, they weren't prepared to do. They were not prepared for the decimation of the entire leadership. But as far as the survival rate of the average troops, most of the troops, when they hit that wall, that fence, that wooden fence line, most of the troops refused to go further. For whatever reason, we don't know why. Could have been the whistling artillery and the murderous frickin' musket fire. but most of the troops refused to go past that point.
Yeah.
At the Emmetsburg, which was the Emmetsburg Road, is what it was. But we'll talk about that after. We're getting ahead of ourselves in a little bit more of Gettysburg. So I apologize for that.
But I just thought it was really interesting that Hill survived Pickett's charge just to die by a random Pennsylvania guy freaking a year and a half later or so.
This is what made Pickett. When you get in contact with a Pickett unit, Picketts were notorious for shooting. When you're on picket duty, which meant you're kind of like, we're sending you out in front of everybody else. Okay. you tend to get nervous because you know that you're in the front. You know the people that are in front of you are probably the enemy, and anything could happen. And you're on picket force. You're kind of out in the wind. You don't have a lot of support, and you could run into a couple of spies. You could run into, anything that was out there. You could a scouting party, another enemy picket, or you could flat out run into a bunch of freaking, an entire battalion that was bearing down on you. And there's only like 8 of you in the picket, and you see an entire battalion of screaming Yankees or an entire battalion of screaming Confederates and rebels coming at you. So picket duty was kind of dangerous.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the funnest job in the world. That's for sure. That's for sure. I'll pass on that one.
Well, your whole job there is to open fire and create gunfire so that people know something's coming. and then die in place. I mean, you're a tripwire. That's really what you were.
Huh. Did they just pick? I don't know. It's Bob's turn. Send Bob.
Basically, yeah, it was rotational duty. You would rotate different units, and then within the units themselves, they'd rotate different people that would be on the picket duty.
All right. Any other? Well, we talked about a couple of Confederate generals. Any more from the Union side that you want to bring up?
Well, the other one I mentioned his name, and I want to bring him up now. All right, and that's Winfield Scott. Now, Winfield Scott survives the war. All right, which is one of the reasons why I want to talk about it. All right, now Winfield Scott was born in 1824. All right, he was born with his twin brother. All right, Hilary Baker Hancock. All right, he was also born in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. So he was another Pennsylvania native. All right, he went to Norriston Academy. All right, and then eventually went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. All right, when he graduated, he of course fought in the Indian Territory with Armistead and with Reynolds. All right, they were fast friends. When he went to the Mexican War, he himself was initially assigned to the duties in Kentucky. So he was assigned several people from Kentucky, right, to be under him. And of course, he served under Winfield Scott. And this is something else. At this point in time, General Winfield Scott, who started the war, all right, as the Secretary of War. I believe was he secretary?
I think so, yeah.
But either way, that he was in charge of all the military forces of the Union, all right, when the war began. But he was one of the big generals that all these people served under. All right, so he fights. He is there after the final victory. He remained in Mexico with the 6th Infantry Division until the peace treaty was signed. He served as an adjutant in Fort Snelling. He's another person who basically serves his entire career. Right? He gets married, unfortunately, for his his children. He has children, of course. Unfortunately for them, that they both die before they do. He serves a tour in Florida, and then when the Civil War breaks out, he goes to the north, and they went to the south. He initially starts the role as quartermaster, which, like I said, a lot of these people start as quartermasters, right? And then they were put in charge of brigades, and he serves under a number of them. And during the Peninsula Campaign, he earned a reputation as never being broken through. None of his troops were ever broken through. All right, so he is then given 1st Division of 2nd Corps before finally getting 2nd Corps, being assigned the entire 2nd Corps commander, which he serves as the 2nd Corps commander from that point on in the Army of the Potomac. In the Battle of Gettysburg, it is his forces that are directly in contact with Pickett's charge. It's his area of responsibility that gets attacked by Pickett. After the war, though, he actually runs, all right, for the U.S. presidency, and serves is one of the few that serves in a political posts after the war.
He was a Republican, I'm guessing?
Actually, he was a Democrat.
Oh, that's a little bit surprising.
Yeah, he loses to Rutherford B. Hayes, and then refocused again, but fails again. But he does serve several different posts under Democrat administrations that come later.
Yeah. Any other major battles that he participated in, other than Gettysburg?
He participated in damn near every one of them.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, he was the 2nd Corps commander after the Peninsula Campaign. He was the 2nd Corps commander. He He was at Fredericksburg, although the Second Corps was not heavily involved in comparison to several of the others. He serves at Antietam. He serves at Chancellorsville during the disaster at Chancellorsville. There were a few people that mentioned that he should have taken charge instead of George Meade, but George Meade was senior, and so that's the reason that George Meade is actually placed. Lincoln gives the nod to Meade rather than to Hancock. He was also well liked by his men. At the Battle of Gettysburg, of course, he is also wounded. But I didn't want to go too far into it. After Gettysburg, after convalescence, he remains the Second Corps commander, and under Meade and under Grant, they goes through the entire rest of the war, through the Vicksburg, through the Petersburg campaign, through Cold Harbor, etc. Other than that, as far as being one of the best Corps commanders that they had, the fact that for the most part his troops never ran was one of the greatest distinctions that he ever carried.
Yeah, absolutely. And holding up against Pickett's charge, that had to be a task.
Well, I mean, it was in a certain regard, but then again, the thing is we'll talk about it when we get to the when we get to the battle.
All right, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I don't want to. Well, we got Gettysburg coming up, and we'll talk about the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah, so next week we're going to be talking about the spy rings ran by both the Union and the Confederacy, correct?
Yes.
Well, that should be an entertaining episode. I think we've pretty much hit an hour, give or take 5-10 minutes. Anybody else you want to talk about, or should we wrap it up here?
No, that's good. I see that 40 unfortunately had to leave.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back with the news tomorrow. It'll be the Red Eye, Monday at 3 on the West Coast. Good night and good luck.